A respected black judge is arrested after planted drugs are found in her car. The headlines move at light speed. By sunrise, the internet has already signed her confession. But while the world screams, Amara Collins notices the one shadow that doesn't belong. They try to erase a lifetime of integrity in a single night, but she chooses patience over panic and cold proof over loud noise. This is Silent Proof Stories, where the truth never shouts, it reveals.
Amara Collins left the courthouse through a side door into a quiet lot where the security lights hummed and the air carried a damp, late summer smell. Her heels were in her hand, flats on her feet, robe folded with the careful habit of someone who kept order even when her mind was full. The hearing had been tense, not from shouting, but from how stubborn the truth could be. A witness had hesitated. An attorney had pressed too hard. Amara had held the room steady with the calm tone she used when people forgot what was at stake. Her car sat under a tree dripping onto the windshield. When she started the engine, the radio came on low, a voice murmuring about weather and traffic. She turned it down until it was barely there. She wanted quiet. She wanted familiar streets and the simple feeling of going home. 2 blocks later, she noticed the patrol car. At first, it was just headlights in the mirror. Then it stayed with her through one light, then another. The distance never changed. Amara kept both hands on the wheel, shoulders loose, breathing even. She told herself not to invent trouble where there was none. Still, she checked her speed without making a show of it. 35. Then 34. The patrol car didn't pass. It didn't turn away. When the red and blue finally flashed, the soundless burst of color filled her rearview mirror like a warning painted in the air. Amara signaled, eased to the curb beneath a street lamp, and stopped with the same smooth control she used at the bench. She lowered her window halfway and placed her license and registration on the dashboard. The officer approached slowly, flashlight angled down. "Evening, ma'am," he said, courteous on the surface. "Everything all right tonight?" "Yes," Amara replied. "I'm heading home." He nodded, eyes moving over her car like he was reading it. "Coming from the courthouse?" "Yes." "What case were you on?" Amara's pause was brief, measured. "I'm a judge," she said. "My docket isn't a roadside topic." His smile tightened. "Just making conversation." "You seem nervous." "I'm tired," she said, keeping her voice level. He leaned closer, not into the window, but close enough to claim the space. One hand hovered near his belt. "Have you had anything to drink tonight? Any medication?" "No. Any reason there'd be anything in your vehicle I should know about? Pills, cash, weapons, anything illegal?" The questions came too neatly, like steps on a staircase built ahead of time. Amara watched his hands, the angle of the light, the way his feet were planted to block her door if she tried to step out. She noted the quick glance toward the trunk, then back to her face, waiting. In the glass, her eyes stayed steady, but her pulse counted seconds. She memorized the name tag, the badge number, and the breath between each question carefully. "Truth leaves proof," she told herself, as calmly as a prayer. The officer straightened and stepped back as if he had reached a decision. "All right," he said, voice still polite, but less warm. "I'm going to ask you to step out of the vehicle." Amara kept her hands visible. "Am I being detained?" "Just routine," he replied, already shifting his flashlight. "Step out for me." She moved slowly, making no sudden gestures, and stood beneath the street lamp with the night air cooling the back of her neck. The officer positioned her near the rear bumper, slightly to the side, where passing cars would wash them in brief waves of light. Another patrol car rolled up behind the first, quiet as a thought. A second officer stepped out and lingered near the passenger side, watching without speaking. The first officer circled her car with a practiced pace, flashlight tracing the seams of doors and windows like he expected to discover something simply by looking hard enough. He glanced at Amara only once, then asked, "You mind if I take a quick look inside?" "I do mind," Amara said. "I do not consent to any search." His mouth lifted in something that wasn't a smile. "That's fine," he said, as if her answer didn't matter. "We'll do this another way." He leaned into the open driver's window. Amara's eyes followed the movement of his shoulders, the angle of his wrist, the way his fingers disappeared under the dash for a moment longer than they needed to. He shifted to the center console and opened it with a small click. Then he moved to the passenger side and opened that door, letting the interior light spill out. Amara stayed still. She slowed her breathing to keep her mind sharp. She listened to the faint rattle of plastic, the scrape of fabric, the quiet shuffle of his boots on asphalt. The second officer said nothing, only watched her face as if waiting for it to crack. After less than a minute, the first officer stepped back into view holding a small, clear bag between two gloved fingers. "Well," he said softly, like a man disappointed to be proven right. "Looks like we've got a problem." The bag was sealed. Inside was a tight bundle of white powder, pressed into the corner as if it had been handled recently. He held it up to the light with a careful flourish, letting it catch the glow like a trophy. "Any idea what this is?" Amara didn't answer, not because she couldn't speak, but because she wanted every second of this to stay clean in her memory. She looked at the bag, at the seal, at the edges where plastic met plastic. The closure line wasn't straight. It looked slightly wrinkled, like something that had been opened and pressed shut again. The seal strip was too dull in one spot, as if a thumb had rubbed it. Her stomach tightened, but her face stayed quiet. The officer nodded as if her silence confirmed his story. "Found it right here," he said, tapping the inside of the passenger door pocket with his flashlight. A place Amara never used. A place that held nothing but an emergency napkin and a folded brochure from a courthouse event months ago. He turned to the second officer. "We're good." He reached for Amara's wrists. "Ma'am, you're under arrest." Cold metal closed around her hands. The click sounded loud in the stillness. For a moment, there was no shouting, no drama, only the steady hum of the streetlight and the distant rush of traffic. Amara stood cuffed on the curb, feeling the world tilt without moving, and kept her eyes on the sealed bag as if it might tell the truth by itself. Morning arrived without kindness. By the time Amara was released on bond, her name had already become a headline that moved faster than any correction ever could. She sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea she didn't taste, watching a local anchor speak with the careful excitement people used when they thought they were witnessing a downfall. Under Amara's photo, the caption read, "Judge arrested in drug scandal." Beneath it, another line, "Sources say investigation ongoing." Sources. No evidence shown. No explanation. Just a story shaped to fit the moment. On her phone, a clip played again and again, a shaky video from someone's window down the street showing flashing lights and a woman in cuffs. The angle hid her face, but the internet didn't need clarity. They filled in the blanks with joy. She scrolled once and regretted it. Comments stacked like stones. Corrupt all of them. Finally caught. Throw her away. Another one of those judges. Some were worse, sharp with hatred that felt old and hungry. Others were smug, as if they had been waiting for a reason to feel superior. The cruelty was casual, tossed out between breakfast posts and jokes, like the person in the headline wasn't a living woman with a family and a history and a future. Her mother called first. The moment Amara answered, she heard breath and prayer mixed together. "Baby," her mother said, voice shaking, "tell me this isn't true." "It isn't," Amara replied. She kept her tone steady because her mother's fear had nowhere to go. Her sister called next, anger spilling out before greetings. "They did this on purpose," she said. "They want you off that bench. Tell me the name. Tell me where he works." "I have it," Amara said. "I'm handling it." Then her aunt, softer, whispering scripture as if the words could wrap around the damage. "God sees everything," she murmured. "He sees what people do in the dark." Amara closed her eyes for a moment and let those words sit, not as comfort but as a reminder to stay grounded. Texts came in waves. A former clerk wrote, "I'm so sorry. I know you." A classmate sent a single heart. One attorney offered help and then deleted the message as if worried it would be seen. Others said nothing at all. People who used to greet her with bright smiles in the hallway were suddenly absent, their silence louder than any insult. She placed her phone face down and listened to the quiet of her house. The refrigerator clicking, the clock marking time without judgment. Her hands still remembered the bite of metal from the cuffs. Her mind replayed the officer's words, the bag, the seal, the moment his voice shifted like a mask sliding into place. Amara could feel the urge to defend herself publicly, to speak into the noise and force people to listen. She knew how to command a room. She could do it again, but she didn't. She understood something the internet didn't. Noise was easy. Proof was harder. Proof lasted. She lifted a notebook, turned to a clean page, and began writing the timeline from the stop, minute by minute, word by word. She wrote the badge number, the questions, the way the flashlight moved, the place the bag appeared from. Her pen didn't shake. She wouldn't argue with strangers celebrating a lie. She would build something quiet and solid, and she would let it stand in the place where truth belonged. The notice arrived before noon, delivered by courier in a plain envelope that felt heavier than it should have. Amara sat at her dining table and read it once, then again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less final. Pending investigation. Temporary suspension. Administrative leave effective immediately. Her access to chambers revoked until further notice. The language was formal, careful, and bloodless. It did not mention her name beyond the heading. It did not speak of dignity or decades of service. It did not acknowledge the late nights she had stayed to review motions or the children she had watched leave her courtroom steadier than they entered. It simply placed her aside, as if she were an item misfiled and waiting to be sorted. By the time she drove to the courthouse that afternoon, the hallway outside her chambers was already changed. A maintenance worker stood by the door, finishing the placement of a temporary seal. Her nameplate remained polished and centered, but the lock beneath it had been replaced. A colleague approached from the far end of the corridor. Judge Whitman slowed when he saw her, his expression arranged into concern. "Amara," he said quietly, I'm sorry about all this." "So am I," she replied. He glanced around before stepping closer. "You know how these things look. It's probably best to let the process work. I'm sure it'll clear up." His tone was soft, but the distance in it was unmistakable. He did not touch her arm. He did not lower his voice as if sharing confidence. He stood at a careful angle, as though proximity itself carried risk. "I appreciate that," she said. He nodded once, already stepping back. "Take care of yourself." Amara watched him leave and felt the shape of what had changed. Sympathy without solidarity. Concern without commitment. Later, she sat in the public gallery of her own courtroom. She chose the back row where she could see without being seen. Another judge occupied her chair, robe draped over shoulders that did not belong to her. The cadence was different. The pauses fell in unfamiliar places. Even the air seemed altered. For a brief moment, something sharp pressed behind her ribs. Not jealousy, not anger, just the hollow realization that spaces filled quickly once vacated. She left before the session ended and returned home with a folder under her arm. At her desk, she opened a new document and began again. 10:14 p.m., patrol lights activated. 10:16 p.m., officer approaches vehicle. 10:19 p.m., request to exit vehicle. Minute by minute, she recorded every detail she could recall. She described the tone shift, the angle of the flashlight, the hesitation before the bag was displayed. She wrote without embellishment, without emotion. At the top of the page, she underlined a single sentence: "Truth leaves proof." It was not comfort. It was instruction. They met in a quiet conference room above a bookstore downtown, far from the courthouse, and even farther from the news vans that had begun circling it. Nadia Reed arrived without a briefcase, carrying only a leather folder tucked beneath her arm. She was younger than many expected for someone with her reputation, but there was nothing hurried about her movements. She greeted Amara with a firm handshake and a steady gaze. "No cameras," Nadia said, glancing at the frosted windows as she took her seat. "No statements today. We start small." Amara nodded. The quiet suited her. There was no need for outrage here. Outrage would feed the story others were already telling. Nadia opened the folder and slid a notepad across the table. Tell me everything. Not what it felt like. What happened? Minute by minute. Amara spoke without raising her voice. She described the patrol car following her through 2 lights, the tone of the officer's greeting, the specific wording of each question. She recalled where his flashlight lingered, how long he leaned into the vehicle, the way his hand disappeared from view just before he claimed to find something. She mentioned the seal on the bag, the slight wrinkle along the edge. Nadia listened without interruption, her pen moving in precise strokes. When Amara finished, the room was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic outside. First rule, Nadia said finally. We don't fight the noise, we fight the record. She listed the requests in a calm, even voice. Body cam footage from both officers, dash cam footage from both patrol cars, radio transmissions for the entire stop, full evidence intake logs from the precinct that processed the bag, chain of custody documentation from the moment it left the officer's hand. We ask for everything, Nadia continued, not because we expect them to hand it over easily, because every request becomes part of the file. And files matter. Amara folded her hands on the table. And if they delay? They will, Nadia said without hesitation. Delays are part of the trap. They hope frustration will make you reckless. They hope you'll speak out of turn or agree to something that makes this disappear quietly. Amara held her gaze. I won't. Nadia gave a slight nod. Good. We respond to every delay with another request. We keep copies of everything. We track who answers and who doesn't. If the evidence is clean, it will hold. If it isn't, the gaps will show. There was no dramatic promise of victory, no raised voice about injustice. Just steps. Paper. Time. Amara felt the steady weight of the plan settle in her chest. It did not erase what had happened, but it gave shape to the path ahead. We let the paperwork speak, Nadia said, closing her folder. Amara nodded once. And we listen. Elaine Parker called just after sunset, her voice low and deliberate, as if the walls of her apartment might be listening. She had worked at the courthouse for 23 years, long enough to recognize the difference between routine conflict and something that lingered in the air long after it ended. I didn't say anything before, she began. I wasn't sure it mattered, but I think it does. Amara listened without interrupting. A few weeks ago, Elaine continued, that officer, Kellen, came to your chambers. Not officially. He signed in at the front desk, but he didn't request a meeting through the usual channel. He waited outside for almost 20 minutes. Amara searched her memory. I remember someone asking to speak with me about a case dismissal. Yes, Elaine said. He left looking calm. But he wasn't calm when he came in. Elaine described how Kellen had stood at the counter, jaw tight, asking for access to files he had no authority to review. His tone was measured, but his eyes weren't. Elaine had noticed the way he pressed his thumb into the counter, as if holding himself back. He said you were interfering with an investigation, Elaine said. He used careful words, but it felt personal. Amara closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. And you kept something. Elaine hesitated only a second. I printed the visitor log entry. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. I save things that feel off. She had also made a note of the hallway timestamp from the security monitor near Chambers. The time Kellen arrived did not match the time he claimed to have been elsewhere in his later report. I checked it twice, Elaine said. It's small, but it doesn't line up. Relief moved quietly through Amara, not loud or triumphant, just steady. A detail, a thread. Later that evening, they met with Marcus Vale in a narrow maintenance office tucked behind the courthouse loading dock. Marcus supervised building systems, cameras, access cards, locks most people never noticed. There's something you should know, Marcus said, lowering his voice. There's an older hallway camera near evidence intake. It's not part of the main police feed, it's building property. Does it record? Nadia asked. It does, Marcus replied. Low resolution, not glamorous, but it runs on its own system. He explained that few people paid attention to it anymore. It had been installed after a renovation years ago and was maintained separately from police equipment. Amara exchanged a glance with Nadia. Proof they were beginning to understand might not be waiting in official reports or polished statements. It might be resting in overlooked corners, recorded by systems no one thought to erase. The first response from the department arrived 3 days after Nadia filed the formal requests. It was short, polite, and empty. The body cam footage was currently being processed. The dashcam recordings were under review. Evidence intake logs required supervisory approval before release. The tone suggested cooperation without offering anything real. Nadia read the letter twice and placed it flat on the table. Processing, she said evenly. That word can stretch for months. Amada sat across from her, hands folded, eyes steady. They're buying time, yes, Nadia replied. Time dulls public attention. It makes people forget details. Another email followed that afternoon. The department needed clarification on the scope of the request. Then another, stating that certain files were archived and would require additional clearance. Each response felt like a door opened halfway and then gently shut. The pressure came from a different direction the next morning. A prosecutor Amara had known for years requested a private conversation. They met in a neutral office, blinds half closed. He avoided eye contact as he spoke. This is difficult, he began. For everyone. Amara waited. There may be a way to resolve this quietly, he continued. If you accept responsibility for a minor possession charge, the department could recommend leniency. A small fine, community service, no prison time. Your reputation might recover faster if this doesn't drag on. The words were framed as kindness, but they carried weight beneath them. You're asking me to confess, Amara said. I'm asking you to consider the long term, he replied carefully. Trials are unpredictable. Public opinion is fragile. Amara held his gaze. I will not admit to something I didn't do, he sighed, as if disappointed by her stubbornness. Sometimes survival requires compromise. Not this kind, she said. When she left the meeting, the air outside felt heavier. The suggestion lingered like smoke. Confess and go home. Admit guilt and make it small. Trade truth for quiet. Back in Nadia's office, she relayed the conversation. They're coordinated, Nadia said. The delays, the offer. Someone wants this resolved before we see the records. Amara nodded slowly. Then, we don't let it resolve. Nadia drafted another motion, this time requesting a court order to compel release of all footage and logs within a fixed deadline. Each request added pressure. Each delay created its own paper trail. Late that evening, alone at her desk, Amara traced her finger over the edge of her notebook. The phrase she had written days earlier still sat at the top of the page. Truth leaves proof. It wasn't comfort. It was resistance. And resistance, she knew, required patience stronger than fear. The break-in happened without shattered glass or alarms. When Amada stepped into her driveway just after dusk, she noticed her car door slightly ajar. Not wide, not obvious, just enough to catch the porch light at the wrong angle. She stopped before reaching it, scanning the street. Nothing moved. No unfamiliar vehicles, no lingering silhouettes. She approached slowly. The interior was disturbed, but not destroyed. The glove compartment hung open. The back seat had been searched, papers shifted and tossed aside. Her emergency kit lay on the floor, unzipped, yet nothing of value appeared missing. Her wallet, spare change, even a pair of sunglasses remained untouched. It was not theft. It was inspection. Amara closed the door gently and stood still for a moment, listening to the quiet of her own breathing. She felt watched, not in the dramatic sense of footsteps behind her, but in the quieter realization that someone had entered her space with purpose. Inside the house, she moved straight to her home office. The room looked tidy at first glance. Her desk lamp was still off. The chair remained tucked in. Then she saw it. The file folder she kept on the corner of her desk was gone. It wasn't labeled in bold letters. It didn't contain anything explosive, just her handwritten timelines, copies of emails, notes about the seal on the evidence bag. Small things, careful things. Her pulse tightened, but she did not let it rush. Whoever had taken it knew exactly what they were looking for. She called Nadia immediately. "Nothing else?" Nadia asked. "Nothing expensive," Amara replied. "Just the folder." There was silence on the line before Nadia spoke again. "This isn't intimidation from one officer acting alone." "No," Amara said quietly. "It's coordinated. They're trying to send a message." Nadia continued. "Not to harm you. To remind you they can reach you." Amara looked around the room, at the photographs on the wall, at the bookshelf she had arranged herself. The violation felt deliberate, measured. "The case is bigger than him," Nadia said. "If someone else is protecting him, they have something to lose." Amara exhaled slowly. Fear hovered at the edge of her thoughts, but it did not take control. "Then we adjust." They agreed to stop meeting in predictable places. Communications would move through secure channels only. Physical notes would be copied and stored separately. Elaine and Marcus would be brought in carefully, with minimal exposure. That night, as Amara locked every door and turned off every light, she understood something new. The threat was not a story from the past. It was active, breathing, watching. And that meant the truth they were chasing mattered more than she had first believed. Marcus met them after hours in a maintenance corridor that smelled faintly of dust and cleaning solution. He carried a small tablet and a ring of keys that seemed older than the building itself. "It's not connected to the police network," he said quietly. "This system runs through facilities. No one thinks about it unless a pipe bursts." They moved down the hallway toward a narrow room lined with metal cabinets and humming equipment. Marcus unlocked a cabinet and pulled out a compact monitor connected to a separate recording unit. The screen flickered to life in muted gray tones. "The angle isn't great," he warned. "It was installed to watch deliveries, not people." Marcus scrolled through archived dates, fingers careful and steady. "The night of your arrest," he said, tapping the screen. "Let's see what we have." The footage appeared grainy and uneven, like something half forgotten. A timestamp blinked in the corner, precise to the second. The corridor was mostly empty, lights dimmed after business hours. For several long minutes, nothing moved. Then, a figure entered the frame. The officer. He walked down the restricted corridor near evidence intake, not in uniformed haste, but with controlled purpose. He paused at a door, checked his surroundings, then stepped inside for less than a minute before re-emerging. The time on the screen glowed steady and undeniable. Amara felt her chest tighten, not with fear this time, but with recognition. "That's him," she said quietly. Marcus zoomed in as much as the system allowed. The resolution blurred facial detail, but the build, posture, and uniform were unmistakable. Elaine pulled a folded sheet of paper from her bag. "This is the visitor log from that week," she said. "He signed in at the front desk at 8:42 p.m. That footage shows him near evidence intake at 9:17 p.m. Nadia compared the timestamps, eyes moving quickly. His official report says he left the building at 8:55 p.m. Silence settled over the small room as the numbers aligned. The officer's documented timeline skipped the very window captured on this camera. "He never mentioned coming back," Amara said. "He didn't," Nadia replied, "which means he either forgot to log it or he didn't want it logged." Marcus leaned back slightly. "This system stores files independently. If someone wanted to alter police footage, they wouldn't think to check this." Nadia nodded slowly. "This isn't proof of planting yet, but it's proof of access and proof of omission." Amara watched the screen again, memorizing the movement. The corridor, the door, the brief pause. The pattern was no longer abstract. It had shape now, formed by timestamps and absences. "Truth leaves proof," she thought, and this time it felt less like hope and more like structure. Nadia spread the evidence photographs across the conference table, aligning them with copies of the precinct's supply inventory records. The seal on the bag looked ordinary at first glance, transparent strip, printed batch number, official marking. But Nadia did not study what was obvious. She studied what was ordered. "Every evidence bag comes from a logged shipment," she said quietly. "They're issued in sequence. She ran her finger down the printed batch numbers from the precinct's supply sheet. The station had received a shipment of evidence bags 3 weeks before the arrest. The batch numbers moved in clean progression, each recorded as distributed to officers on specific dates. The number on Amara's evidence bag did not fall where it should have. It's from an earlier batch, Nadia said. A batch logged as fully used months ago. Amara leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Could they have found an old bag? In theory, Nadia replied. But that would require access to outdated inventory not assigned to active use, and it would need to be logged. They checked the logs again. No record showed that batch being reissued or returned to circulation. The bag presented as evidence against Amara existed in a sequence that no longer matched the station's official supply timeline. Amara closed her eyes for a brief moment and saw again the officer's hands under the streetlight. The way he lifted the bag between 2 fingers, holding it just long enough for the second officer to nod. The way he avoided rotating it fully toward her, keeping the seal angled away. He didn't want me to look too closely, she said softly. Nadia nodded. He expected you to react emotionally, not examine details. Together, they drafted a formal motion challenging the integrity of the evidence handling. The language was direct and restrained. It requested full disclosure of all inventory logs, internal audits, and prior evidence complaints linked to the officer. It also asked the court to consider sanctions for procedural misconduct if discrepancies were confirmed. Each word was measured, each request precise. When the motion was filed, the effect was immediate. At a press briefing later that week, the officer's tone shifted. He no longer spoke with relaxed certainty. His answers grew shorter. When asked about evidence procedures, he cleared his throat before responding. A bead of sweat formed near his temple despite the cool weather. We followed standard protocol, he insisted. Everything was documented. But his eyes flicked sideways, searching for reassurance that no longer stood beside him. Amara watched the clip in silence. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. The cracks were small, but they were widening. And the more the record demanded explanation, the harder it became to keep the story straight. The courtroom felt familiar and distant at the same time. Amara sat at the defense table, hands folded, posture straight, as if she were simply observing another case instead of standing at the center of it. The gallery was fuller than usual. Reporters occupied the back row, pens ready, cameras resting quietly on their laps. Nadia rose without theatrics. She carried no stack of dramatic exhibits, only a slim folder and a calm expression. When she began speaking, her voice carried evenly through the room. "Your Honor," she said, "we are not here to argue feelings. We are here to examine the record." She walked through the timeline slowly, anchoring each statement to a documented minute. The patrol stop. The officer's reported departure from the courthouse. The timestamp from the maintenance camera showing him entering the restricted corridor after the time he claimed to have left. Each fact was presented without flourish, placed carefully into the space between silence and understanding. Next came the evidence logs. Nadia displayed the batch number sequence from the precinct's supply records. She showed how the bag allegedly found in Amara's car belonged to a batch recorded as fully distributed months earlier. She compared it to the current sequence issued at the time of the arrest. "There is no documented path," Nadia said calmly, "that explains how this bag entered circulation." The prosecutor attempted to interrupt, but the judge raised a hand. Let her finish. Nadia then addressed the missing entry in the officer's official report. No mention of returning to the courthouse, no explanation for the time gap captured on camera. The room grew quieter with each point. The judge leaned forward. "Counsel," he said to the prosecution, "why was this footage not disclosed earlier?" The prosecutor shifted. "We were still reviewing. You have had ample time," the judge replied. "I am ordering full release of all related footage and documentation. No further delays." A murmur passed through the gallery. Then Nadia requested testimony from the internal affairs investigator assigned to the case. The investigator stepped forward reluctantly, hands clasped behind his back. "Has this officer been the subject of prior complaints?" Nadia asked. The investigator hesitated. There have been inquiries. How many? Several. Related to evidence handling? A pause. Yes. The word settled heavily in the room. Amara did not move. She did not look toward the officer. She kept her gaze forward, letting the facts expand in the silence. There was no need for anger, no need for raised voices. The record was unfolding on its own, and for the first time since the arrest, the system was opening under the weight of its own omissions. The final footage was released 2 weeks after the hearing, and this time there were no gaps. The body cam recording began before the patrol lights flashed and continued without interruption. Frame by frame, it showed the officer stepping out of his vehicle, adjusting his gloves, and walking toward Amara's car. It showed him leaning inside for longer than necessary, his shoulder blocking the lens just enough to obscure his hands. Then, in a brief shift of angle, it caught what he had not expected anyone to see. Before he circled back into view with the small clear bag, he had already held it. The recording revealed him removing the bag from his jacket pocket and lowering it out of frame. Seconds later, he straightened and announced its discovery as if he had just found it by chance. The room where the footage was reviewed remained silent as it played. There was no room left for interpretation. No clever explanation could reshape what the camera had captured. The prosecutor's statement followed the next morning. Charges against Judge Amara Collins were dismissed in full. The office announced an immediate investigation into the officer's conduct, extending beyond this single arrest. Within days, additional cases surfaced where evidence procedures appeared irregular. The pattern widened. The officer was arrested and charged with evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and misconduct tied to prior cases. The sentence he faced carried decades behind it. 30 years was no longer a headline about her. It was about him. When Amara walked back into the courthouse weeks later, there were no flashing cameras. She requested none. Her reinstatement was brief and procedural, her name restored to the door without ceremony. The courtroom felt steadier than before, not because nothing had changed, but because she understood its weight differently now. She did not speak publicly about revenge or vindication. Instead, she asked to review cases previously overseen by the same officer. Files were reopened quietly. Names were re-examined. For some, her fight meant a second chance. One evening, she invited Elaine and Marcus to her chambers after hours. No speeches were given. She simply thanked them, not as heroes, but as people who had chosen not to look away. Elaine smiled gently. Marcus shifted his weight, uncomfortable with praise. As the light from the hallway dimmed and the courthouse settled into its nighttime hush, Amara looked at the sealed folders stacked neatly on her desk. She traced her finger along the edge of one and spoke softly, almost to herself. Truth leaves proof. This time, it felt less like resistance and more like peace.